Welcome to a special episode of the Spin Cycle podcast. I'm Caley Fretz, and today I am joined by our own reporter, Jonny Long. Welcome, Jonny.
Hello again.
And freelance gun for hire, Chris Marshall-Bell, a mercenary. Welcome.
Hello, Caley. Hello, Jonny.
It's good to have you guys on. And today we are going to go behind the scenes and inside the reporting that went into a feature that we published this week on the fall, or Skyfall, as our, I think, excellent headline put it, of the Ineos Grenadiers, particularly in 2024. We'll also provide some analysis and maybe even a few opinions based on what we've seen and heard on the major themes of that story. So for those who missed it and missed the last decade, let's quickly get you up to speed. For years, this team, formerly known as Team Sky, reigned supreme, racking up Tour de France victories with mechanical precision. They were the embodiment of dominance, fueled by cutting-edge technology, meticulous planning, and a controversial approach to marginal gains that pushed the boundaries of what some considered acceptable in the sport. But cracks have started to appear in the Ineos empire. The once unstoppable machine has sputtered, struggling to replicate its past glory. From Chris Froome's salbutamol case and the Richard Freeman Tribunal to the ever-shifting leadership structure and the emergence of a new generation of challengers, the team has faced a barrage of challenges both on and off the bike. So in our story, we investigated the factors contributing to this decline. We spoke to numerous sources, I think it was over a dozen, former riders, staff members, agents, who offered a glimpse into the inner workings of this complex and often somewhat secretive organization. Today, we are pulling back the curtain a little bit further. Join us as we discuss the behind-the-scenes story of our reporting, the challenges we faced, the insights we gained, and what the future might hold for this once dominant force in cycling. Buckle up. All right, so gentlemen, let's talk about the sort of the origins of this. We were talking about it over the summer, is when it first became clear that something was going on at this team. So tell me about the impetus, the origins of this particular reported piece.
We'd often just message in our company Slack, just being like, what is going on at this team? Like, we need to do like a big piece, like looking, up, just trying to find out what's going on. Because the thing is, we're as interested as everyone else a lot of the time. Like, that's how these things, a lot of the time we are obviously reporters and stuff, but we're also cycling fans to a certain extent. But it's one of those things where then the story slowly unravels. So there's constantly new bits of information coming up, and then you talk about it again, then it, gets lost in the background because it's this huge overarching narrative. And then Chris Marshall-Bell rocks up with a freelance pitch being like, have you guys noticed too that Ineos are just a bit weird at the minute? And we're like, yes, we have. We've been thinking of doing something. And then sort of like the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers decided to combine into sort of one mega journalist. You're the white Power Ranger, Chris. Well, yeah, but you're the white Power Ranger because I was about to give you your props because you are, I was thinking about this before we started recording, not to toot your horn too much. I'd say you're easily top 5 cycling reporters right now. You are, one of the most well-sourced people in the game. And we probably couldn't have got this over the line without your, I was about to say it in a disparaging way, but in a dark arts sort of way. But it's a dark arts, but in a good way. So I don't know how to phrase that, but yeah.
I appreciate that, and I mean, I must say that was an 8,000 word article, and I probably wrote about 300 words. So to be honest, you did all the work.
The important bits, though. A lot of the time, you're sort of learning. Let's put this in plain terms, right? It's about extracting information from the right people and trying to figure out who wants to give this information and who doesn't, and how you obtain it and then confirm it and all that. So I think a good place to start is, Chris, you brought a lot of sourcing to the table here. I mean, without giving away your secret source, which means everyone else can go out and do what you do, and also obviously not naming people. But maybe specifically for this story, if you could sort of let us know how you went about it or how you framed it, because you managed to get loads of people talking.
Just before I answer that, with answering the question, why did we do this? There's the obvious answer of what's going on at Ineos, because this has been going on for 2-3 years. And it was curious to me during the tour how many people I spoke to, not just journalists, but team managers, and even one rider as well, who was constantly mocking them to me, how Ineos were just a laughing stock, and people found it funny. Like, no one actually cared about their riders. No one wanted to talk about anything else about Ineos other than the fact that they're just a little bit rubbish. And the second thing that really piqued my interest, and it was when I first started digging around this story properly in August and in September, was that there was a huge sense of injustice towards especially Steve Cummings and Rod Ellingworth. There was a lot of people, both current staff at Ineos, former staff at Ineos, those who know them well, who had a lot of sympathy towards them. And they actually just wanted to right what they've seen was a lot of wrongs. They really feel like those two should not have left Ineos at all. And they wanted to put their side of the story across to kind of change the narrative towards them. And that really became quite evident the more and more I dug on this.
That's an interesting point, though, Chris, because as we do this reporting, and this is a bit of sort of, I don't know, journalism 101 stuff, right? But like everybody you talk to has a perspective, but also kind of an end goal generally. And you have to very much keep that in mind when you're talking to people, that they are trying to frame a narrative. They know who they're talking to, right? They're not talking to their buddy. They're talking to somebody who's writing a story about this that is going to go out into the world and is going to frame a narrative around an entire team and people. And you must keep that in mind when you're navigating this. How do you navigate that particular reality? How do you make sure that you're not just a sort of a useful idiot for somebody, basically?
It's very, very true. It's a very good question. And I think that's where you have to rely on the relationship that you've built with these sources. I mean, I don't know exactly how many people I spoke to, maybe 9 or 10. Pretty much all of those sources I've had a long-term relationship with. They know me, I know them. I know that I can trust them just as much as they can trust me. But it's double sourcing and triple sourcing. And there were a few elements of the story which we got sourced 2 or 3 times. There was one particular rumor which I forget now, and it's annoying me because I would mention it, which turned out to be completely false. And I remember putting it in our WhatsApp group, being like, "Oh my God, this is amazing," and it was rubbish. It was a lie. But we could only work out that it was a lie because we went.
Was it Pidcock getting fired?
Yes, it was that. It was Pidcock getting fired. But we could only work out that was a rumor by going to all of our different sources and finding out the truth. So even if you have a really good relationship with someone, you can't take what they say as gospel 100%. You've got to speak to other people around it as well. But what I found particularly interesting with this is that over the years, Ineos have been a very, very hard team to get information out of. Very corporate, they're very bureaucratic. I'm probably not going to make any more friends at Ineos. Not that they think I'm their best friend anyway, but they've never really been a friendly operation. Like, they're not a team who you can walk around the team paddock with and just chat to the team staff and have a laugh with, which you can with most teams. They're kind of, dare I say, a bit of the nasty team, the cold team.
Though the other way, let me reframe this slightly more positively for them, which is that they spent 10 years at the very top of the sport. They spent 10 years as the Death Star. They spent 10 years being like intentionally terrifying to their opponents. And part of that was what you're talking about. Part of that was this sort of like I remember, they'd roll up in brand new Jags and brand new, they always had the nicest stuff. And I'm talking about the real peak Sky era years here. It was a very different thing than it was the last couple of years. And honestly, if you're a press person there, to give them some kudos, some plaudits, that was probably the goal, and they succeeded, right? Like, they didn't necessarily need us so much, and they put this aura of invincibility around the entire team. And that is part of what broke down in the last couple of years, right? Is that aura of invincibility. And that's part of the reason why we wanted to write the story to begin with.
Well, and it's definitely true that it's true in that they didn't feel like they needed the media. And they didn't really, because when you're winning the bike races, you get the attention, you get the headlines. So the collaboration didn't have to be as open as it was with the other teams. They came in, changed a lot of the rules around how pro cycling worked, and changed the sport a lot. If we go back to pre-Team Sky, there's so many things that you take for granted have been around for ages, and they just haven't. But the one thing that then,
which we are going to get into later in the show, I think.
But the thing that changed is that as employees left who were around during that era, they then, I think, to some extent didn't like how things changed and how what they had helped build had sort of been left to rot to some extent. So then they wanted to to sort of have that highlighted, to sort of hold their feet to the fire a little bit as much as, you know, the media can, and not just let it, like, think something they worked on for years just slide into the sea. I think that's probably, I think it with anyone, right? Something you work on, you work hard at, you want to see it prosper and to feel like you've done something rather than it to all kind of feel like it was for nothing.
What I would say, just to maybe round this section off, is that not everyone we spoke to was directly in the team. There was a lot of people who we spoke to around the team. So, you know, friends or colleagues who have friends or stuff there. But
agents.
You don't leak. Yeah. You don't give press information if you're not happy. People have given us information because they're not happy. And that includes people within the team. And that tells its own story. And if it was just one person giving information, then you can say, oh, you know, they've just got a chip on their shoulder. But there's a lot of people not happy at Ineos, and that speaks volumes for the state of the team.
Let's get into kind of the story itself, right? This is a decade plus story, because Sky has been around for more than a decade now, and really found its first massive success all the way back in 2012, right? Just 12 years ago. We have a question on the story itself in the comment section from Brian Ledford. It says, a reasonably common narrative in ball sports is management lucks into talented player, thinks winning is due to management, finds out that it's not. In U.S. sports, the Chicago Bulls post-Jordan and the Patriots post-Brady are the obvious data points. They also had their versions of marginal gains, triangle offense, the Patriots way. The Sky Ineos story might be that they were great while they had a healthy Froome and not so good otherwise. And they aren't unique in this. If Vingegaard had been more seriously injured, Visma would be spending some time wandering in the wilderness. Ditto UAE and Pogacar. How different is 2024 Ineos from 2010 to 2011 Sky? So do we think that theory is accurate, that the team, Sky, the dominance that we knew was essentially just built much in the same way that sort of UAE has built its dominance off of a single rider? Do we think that that's an accurate statement?
No, I don't. I really disagree with that quite a lot.
I agree with you.
If you look back to 2012, let's say peak Sky was 2012 to 2018, right? 2019 when they won the tour.
Minus 14 when they
But
lost.
They had all of the best domestiques. Like, their team was bloody scary. UAE have an amazing team now. They struggled for a few years to get to that level of quality that Sky had, but everyone wanted to go to Sky. And I don't mean this as a slight on Lucas Hamilton, but I'm going to disrespect him. I noticed the other day that Lucas Hamilton is moving to Ineos. He's a really average mountain domestique, and he's going from Jayco to Ineos. That is not the caliber of rider that Sky would have been signing 6-7 years ago. Like, they would have been,
unless they were very, very young and the potential ceiling was high, right? Like,
exactly.
I mean, in those days, I was working for Velo News, and I was obviously keeping a close eye on all of the American riders, and so, you know, it was Ian Boswell going to Sky, and it was Joe Dombrowski going to Sky, the winner of the Baby Giro. Or I guess second at the Baby Giro. What did Joe do? Anyway, doesn't matter. Up there, like one of sort of the brightest young talents in the sport, and that's where they all wanted to go. Even though it was maybe not the best cultural fit, and neither of those riders lasted more than a couple years because it wasn't a particularly good cultural fit for them. But it was still where they wanted to end up because it was the sort of pinnacle of the sport. To Brian's kind of point specifically, like, was the marginal gain stuff just sort of a cover, an explanation for, actually, we just have the best rider, right? We just have Froome, or we have Wiggins. I don't think that that's true, because one of the things about Sky is it really does feel like they made Tour de France winners. I think Bernal they didn't make.
No, Bernal
was just Bernal.
Luck. That was the luck. Or good, yeah.
They made Wiggins what he was. They made Froome what he was. These are riders who were very good, but were not Tour de France winners prior.
Because they made Wiggins, Froome, and Thomas, Bernal, who was a phenomenal talent, wanted to go there. The next best talents now don't go to Ineos.
So I guess to sort of dig into that a little bit further, and we're going to get into sort of Freeman and the other things that are part of the downfall. You ended up with this because they made made is not really the right word. They're not. I don't want to make it sound like we're talking donkeys into racehorses here, right? Like they found a couple places where they could find advantage. So Sky in the early years was genuinely the first team properly using altitude. Right? That, and in the sort of 2012, 2013, 2014 kind of era, was a massive advantage. There were other riders doing altitude camps, but it wasn't entire teams, often wasn't even GC riders. It was much less common. And you're talking about a properly using altitude is a sort of 4, 5, 6% advantage, right? So that was absolutely massive. And then you get into the other things that are harder to actually pin down, but there's sort of a bunch of smoke and an unknown amount of fire, right? So you've got the jiffy bag stuff. You've got Richard Freeman losing his laptop. You've got whatever on earth he was doing, a box of testosterone showing up to the Manchester Velodrome. You've got all these other things that sort of swirl around the team. Chris Froome's salbutamol case. All these other things that swirl around the team, and it is impossible to draw a straight line between those things and being better than everybody else, but they all still exist. And so you can sort of, you can't draw a straight line, but you can certainly put them in the same kind of corner. And I think that more than the kind of Pogačar explanation of they just had the best rider, they genuinely had advantages that around 2018, 19, 20 went away.
Well, we had it in the article in 2020. Dave Brailsford said that Sky Ineos had been ploughing on with their heads down and not watching other teams coming up from behind them with their own advantages, right? It's, hungry dogs run faster. At some point, an empire will fall. Just like that sort of institutional, not rot necessarily, but just like comfortability. When you've won 7 Tours de France in 8 years, you're kind of set, right? You want to keep winning, but then there's teams out there who haven't won a Tour de France in a decade who really, really want to win a Tour de France. You've got riders who really want to win a Tour de France. And when you combine it with, especially the Freeman trial, I think, because that was with the Froome salbutamol and the jiffy bag, there is a lot of unknowns and contested points in that. Whereas at the Freeman trial, you had an actual court, but he got struck off for what he did, right? That's not good. There's no grey area there. And it's not decided by the UCI or some sort of organisation we don't understand. It's a proper like real life court. After the Freeman trial, I think a month or two later, Egan Bernal won the Giro, and then after that, that's when the precipitous fall has happened. So I don't think there's a direct link there, but I think it's one of those things where eventually everything comes back around, comes full circle, and then at the same time, Dave Brailsford, right? He's involved in all of this. That whole Freeman stuff probably knocks you a bit as well, I would have thought.
What I'm going to say here doesn't necessarily have an impact, I don't think, on the team's performance, but I think the biggest consequence done to the team of these doping scandals, if we can call them that, was the damage it done to the team's image among casual fans, because it's a British team. Britain's not really a cycling country. Britain it bought into cycling with Wiggins. Wiggins was amazing. When the tour started in Yorkshire, 2014, it was cycling mad. The biggest damage that these doping, in quotation marks, scandals did is that everyone who didn't follow cycling just assumed that Sky were like everyone else. Everyone just assumed that Sky were like US Postal, were like Armstrong. And that really damaged their credibility and reputation among the fans, the casual sporting fans who were the ones had along for the ride, but now aren't along for the ride. And that could have been better managed by a better PR system, because Ineos Sky, they never answered any questions on that. They just let the press run to their own conclusions.
We actually put together a chart that is Google searches for the term Tour de France from the UK by year, right? And there's a massive peak in 2014, which is obviously when the tour started there. And the low point, to your point, Chris, is 2020, right? Like it's sort of a slow downhill decline, and there's a bit of a kick up after that, but the real low point is 2020. And that whole basically post 2018-19 period is significantly lower than it was for the entire decade prior. So there was a drop in interest from the British public in this team, even as the team was still finding some success, right? Like Geraint Thomas was still winning tours in that window, which I find quite interesting. So the Froome salbutamol case, the jiffy bag, the sort of whole Freeman trial, it's all part of that narrative. It's all part of that sort of slow decline in, I think, an interest in the team itself and an interest in cycling from the public, and also just in the team's fortunes. The other thing that was happening through all of this was Dave Brailsford was at first just distracted and then basically pulled out of the team almost entirely, but not entirely, quite importantly. So let's talk about Dave Brailsford and kind of what he built first, and then why the way that he has exited the team, maybe exit isn't even really the right word, the way that he has stopped sort of day-to-day operations with the team has impacted their fortunes.
I don't think we need to speak for 15 minutes about how much of a genius Brailsford is because he is, to be honest. I know he has his detractors, but what he's done for cycling with British Cycling First and then Ineos, it moved the sport on immensely. And it speaks volumes how many different people came to us and said, we miss Dave Brailsford. Like, they are crying out for him. They really, really want him.
People from like inside the team, you mean?
Everyone.
Yeah. Or recently inside the team.
Is saying, we need Dave back. I've got news for them. Dave's not coming back. He's staying in Manchester. I'm sorry. But I think what I'd like to say, and there's nothing wrong with Brailsford moving on. There's nothing wrong with him going to Man United and before that living in a caravan in Nice. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think the Ineos Sports Group having all these different sporting portfolios, even though they're not very successful yet, I think that actually has that offers a lot of good. And Ben Williams, who was the ex-performance coach at Ineos, he said the same thing to us as well. It has a lot of benefits. And for that same reason, which is not necessarily this question, this is why I don't think Ratcliffe will pull his money from cycling, because I think he likes to have lots of different sporting portfolios. But to go back to Brailsford, I think it's very clear that when he's left the cycling team, he didn't plan his successor, and that's on him. Barely anyone we've spoken to likes John Allard. I mean, one person said that he was a disaster, which I thought was quite harsh, but you said it, not me. But this is on Dave Brailsford. This is his baby. It's not Ratcliffe's baby, it's Brailsford's baby. And it's on him that he hasn't picked a good enough successor, and he's left the team in the lurch. For all that he's done good, he's failed here.
I think Rod Ellingworth, when he was brought back into the fold, when Brailsford probably knew that he wasn't able to commit to the team as he once did, is obviously a great move. Rod Ellingworth, very well respected guy, very talented, has achieved a lot. But one thing that came through from the people we spoke to is that what they were clear about is that despite all of his positives, he wasn't Dave Brailsford, which is obviously a really tough thing to ask of anyone. So then that contributes in two ways, in terms of that Ellingworth will, to some extent, try and replicate both the results and the processes by which Dave Brailsford arrived at what they achieved. But at the same time, Brailsford will know and see that the continuation is not happening, and that Ellingworth isn't the guy to be able to do that, probably because there isn't someone there. And I think it's partly, my opinion, like from after everything we've heard, is that part of it is Brailsford not actually being able to find the person to replace him, and also probably not wanting to completely let go. We heard a lot,
the latter one,
yeah, and we heard a lot of it about how Brailsford would still have sign off on loads of things, right? Ellingworth was day to day, but then he'd have to go to Brailsford and other, Ineos management to get things done, to replace vehicles at bike races, which shouldn't be something that's a problem, especially for a big money team. That should be sorted instantly.
We went from brand new Jags as follow cars in time trials,
yeah,
to broken director sportif cars with no air conditioning within a couple of years.
And like stuff like Brailsford would turn around and at the last minute say that certain riders couldn't be signed after Ellingworth had already told them they'd be signed, and that was apparently the breaking point for Ellingworth. Another part of it is that Brailsford, and probably Ratcliffe as well, underestimated the job they took on at Manchester United. I think football is just an entirely different beast, and within that, Manchester United is even bigger than that. And if we think there's problems at Ineos Grenadiers, the football journalists, and when they get to the bottom of what's going on and what has been going on at Manchester United, will make for an even more interesting story, because to some extent they probably don't have the bandwidth to focus on a team that's 14 times cheaper than Manchester United, and even many more times that less significant. So it really does feel like a perfect storm, all of these things that have contributed to where they are now.
To take a quick step back, again, for sort of, just in case anyone out there is somewhat less initiated and what Brailsford did, he was, as you said, Chris, he's a bit of a genius. Like he built some things that had never been built before. Sky was genuinely impressive. You can argue all day long about whether they stepped over some lines or whether there were gray areas that were utilized and things like that. But regardless, just basic, like the actual sort of marginal gains perspective on the sport was genuinely revolutionary when he started, right? You have to take yourself back to an age when a lot of teams were not paying attention to nutrition, when a lot of teams were not really coaching or training their riders particularly well, when most teams were not using altitude, when there was this sort of odd period in the post-EPO era of cycling where, and I've had other riders tell me this. I've had riders tell me this that were part of the doping era. They said they used doping, cycling used doping as a crutch for so long because you didn't need to optimize yourself. You just needed more blood bags, right? You just needed more EPO vials. And so when that all started to end, and I'm not saying the sport is entirely clean, but we're in a very different place than we were in 2003, for example. When that all started to end, the sport didn't really know how to do these things. And that was the opportunity that Brailsford identified. That was the reason why Sky was so dominant for 5-6 years, really fundamentally. Again, you can argue about the specifics, you can argue about gray areas, but fundamentally he identified the fact that this was a sport that was quite backwards, that had been reliant on illegal things for too long and didn't know how to do the basics properly. And so he was genuinely revolutionary from that perspective. I think that that's sort of important context for what we're talking about here, because then you get to kind of 2018-19. The Sky methods have now been in place for 5, 6, 7 years, and the rest of the sport is starting to catch up. And as the quote that you gave, Jonny, where they just had Sky had their heads down and they weren't paying attention to who was coming up behind them. That's a big part of it, right? Everyone else is now going to altitude. Everybody else is now eating more carbs or whatever the other things that they're doing. Hopefully not some of the questionable gray area stuff, but everyone's catching up. Right. And then at the same time that everyone is catching up, Dave Brailsford is stepping away. And so you had this kind of perfect storm of what on earth is this team supposed to do? And the replacement, Ellingworth, or now Allert, were never actually given the ability or the power to completely reset and to figure out what the next marginal gains is. Right? Was it Allard that said maximal gains? That's not going to do it. You have to genuinely identify a new opportunity in the sport and jump into it and execute. And that's how you get ahead. And I think that's what UAE and Visma and some of the other teams did. And to me, that opportunity was development teams and getting star athletes at 18 years old, right? That was the next thing that was going to put you ahead in pro cycling. And Sky didn't do it. Ineos didn't do it.
I think Ineos, Sky, Brailsford, it's all the same people, obviously. I think they've done something fundamentally wrong. Ultimately, they haven't trusted people to do the job. If you're going to make Ellingworth general manager, let him be the general manager. Don't have anyone else above him, because then you'll lose him. For what it's worth, I don't think that Rod was actually the right person for that job. I think he was better at actually bringing riders through.
Yeah.
Well, but here's the thing. If my theory is correct, and that essentially development pathways have become the marginal gain of the early 2020s.
Yes.
He should have been given that opportunity. Yes. Now, hindsight's 2020, but that I think it makes a ton of sense to do that.
Well, it's a simple fit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's what Ellingworth was known for. I mean, Ellingworth was the guy who ran British cycling. He was the guy who ushered through Mark Cavendish and Wiggins and all these other riders. He's the guy that built that built British cycling into what it was, or helped build British cycling into what it was in the late 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 kind of era. And he was not given the same power at Ineos in 2019, 2020.
Can we talk about Tom Pidcock? Because not only is he the person that most people have been interested in discussing off the back of the article, but what's going on with him within the team actually crystallizes a lot of the issues and things that wouldn't have happened back when they were successful.
Unfortunately, this is the end of the free version of this podcast. You are listening to the free feed, the free Spin Cycle feed. There is another probably half hour of chat coming up, and we leave the juiciest stuff for the end, obviously. You need to head over and get access to our members-only podcast feed if you want to listen to that. If you're not already a member, head to escapecollective.com/member. And if you are already a member, just Google Escape Collective members-only feed. Open that page up, gives you an RSS, add it to your podcast catcher of choice, and you can listen to the rest of the show. All right. Thanks for listening. If you want the whole thing, go sign up. Bye-bye.